Good afternoon. Today's session that you have just logged into is You've Got HTML Mail. Now, whoa, I'm getting a huge delay when I say something.
Tuvi, you might want to not have audio on more than one browser because otherwise there's a 20-second delay and
All right.
you'll find it awkward. So yeah, make sure you don't have any audio on any
How
other
about
browser.
now? Do you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
You do not.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, you did hear me.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So, for any reason you don't hear me now, just say something. And I think I'm speaking contemporaneously. I don't think there's a delay anymore. Is there? Um,
Well,
I guess
we
we
never
wouldn't
heard
know
the
that.
delay. So no, you're good.
Well, if there's a delay, we'll fix it as we go along. All right, back to our session. And our session is, of course, You've Got HTML Mail. Now, my company is Vanitsky Consulting, and we develop and market major vertical applications. We have a specialty in nonprofit organizations and community centers. We also do custom software and websites and consulting services. Our largest client is Avis Rent-A-Car, and our smallest client would be like a small one or two person business. Myself personally, I go back to the days of Foxbase and CompuServe. I was just realizing that I remember my CompuServe login number, 70031, 510. I cannot remember my wife's birthday or my anniversary, but my CompuServe number, no problem. I've had articles in Fox Talk, and one of the things I really like doing is expanding the capabilities of VFP. And back in the day, I was a project manager for companies like IBM, Lotus, and Avis Rent-A-Car. And we're going to turn off my camera now. You should get more real estate. Fine. So email is ubiquitous in modern applications. What we're going to do today is review how to allow users to edit their HTML emails, how to send them, then how to store a copy that we can retrieve later for review or for reporting purposes. What we're going to learn, hopefully, today is we're going to learn about email file formats. We're going to learn how to edit the HTML in VFP. We're going to learn how to send emails. We're going to learn how to store copies of them and then how to view the copies that we have previously stored. Now, usually I like to have helpers in my presentations. If anybody's been to any presentation I ever gave at a Fox Pro conference, usually I like to have little helpers. So since it's a mail uh, session, of course, Mr. Mailman came over to help us, but that really wasn't accurate. I think something went a little wrong with that plan there. And I think the reason is, well, this is a little something I thought was important for everyone to know. I don't boast about my children, but this just happened to come up. My daughter happens to be the world's best illustrator, and since she could not do this year's illustrations, we therefore ended up with a mailman with the wrong mailman. All right, but he's going to stick around. He's going to lend us a hand anyway. All right, here's some stuff that we need to know as starting off. The first thing is the scoop on email. Now, I always like to know the history and origins of things because I find that fascinating. So we're not going to go into that in too much detail. However, it's interesting that it was only in 1985 that the invention of domain addresses occurred. Now, when I say only 1985, that makes sense to me. Some perhaps younger people were not even born in 1985, but in 1985, when domain addresses were invented, I remember that it was a big deal. And also in 1985, that's when the law started allowing commercial use of emails. Prior to that, emails were only for government and academic use. And at the same time, SMTP became the standard. It took 5 years before there were email clients to use all this with. And today, of course, email is everywhere. Now, people like to lump all kinds of abilities of servers and clients together and call them SMTP. But in reality, SMTP is one thing. It does it very well, and then it moves on. It delivers a message from point A to point B. outgoing only. That's what SMTP does. Simple mail transfer protocol, the emphasis on simple. Now, there are email text formats. What I mean by that is originally in 1990, when people were sending emails, they sent a plain text email. So if I wanted to say hello to someone, I would type hello and they would receive in the body hello. It was plain text, like a TXT format. But slowly, as HTML became more standardized and had more issues of standardization, more websites, right? HTML started becoming the most accepted way of formatting and presenting emails. And today, I would say 90+% of emails are in HTML. This allows the appearance to be very, very nice. And in fact, here's an email that I recently received from GoDaddy. Now, this consists of actually hundreds and hundreds of lines of code. There's a document in the downloads with the session that lists the code for this email, the HTML code. It's 34 pages long. Now, nonetheless, each HTML emerged as the champion and standard bearer. There are times that I think a simple text is sufficient, as in attached as your receipt. I don't know that as the recipient I need 16 graphics and 2 fonts to tell me that my receipt is attached, but nonetheless, HTML has become the de facto standard for all email content. However, even though there are a standard in terms of the content and the formatting, there is no standard in terms of the file formats for emails being saved. EML, EMLX, message, membox, OLM, PST, these are all different file formats, and they all come from different vendors and different clients. They all do the same thing. So, for example, Gmail uses Mbox. Mbox is not readable in most other formats. However, in the end, it's all the same thing in there. There's no difference. So we're going to use EML. EML is a text-based standard, and it's a text representation. It's easiest to read and parse because we don't have to pull it out of a database using a special format. We don't have to have an Mbox format or a message format or a PST format. EML is just a plain text format that'll make it much easier for us to use. Are there any questions at this point?
No questions so far.
I'll take that as a no. Any questions at this point? I don't hear Doug.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay.
Hello,
So yeah, no, there are no questions.
Okay. No questions?
No, no questions.
Okay, great.
Oh, wait, there is one just came in. What email format does Outlook use?
Yes. You know what? I'm still getting a 20-second delay, it seems.
That means you have a browser window open somewhere that you might want to close. Not the Backstage one, but you have another browser window that's open. Probably on Stage. So close that one if you have one open on Stage.
Yeah. Probably on Stage.
Yep.
All right. Now, hopefully that'll be better. All right. So no questions at this point.
What email format does Outlook use?
Outlook uses the PST format.
That was it.
Okay. Now, there are 4 parts to creating our HTML emails in VFP. The component, the user interface, the enhancements we're going to add, and merging. And these are the things that are going to put together to enable us to allow our user to edit their HTML straight from VFP. Now, as we know, VFP has no native ability to edit HTML, but Windows does. Windows has the DHTML editing control. There's a pretty good chance you have it already, especially if you've ever installed Visual Studio. If not, you can get it from this site here and install it. And it'll put it in C program files x86, common files Microsoft shared, and it'll make a folder called DHTML-ED. So if you need to look at it to add it, look for it to add to your controls in your VFP ActiveX controls, that's where you're going to look for it. Now, there is one other file that you need called DHTML-ED.h. You need the include file. Now, this does not get installed if you download the MSI. And Microsoft says the reason for that is they believe everybody would already have it because everybody has installed Visual Studio or some other super cool Microsoft product on their computer, and therefore they would have it, which obviously is not necessarily true. So if you've never installed any of those products on your machine, you will need this include file, which we included in the source code zip file with the session so that it's easier for you to find. So, Mr. Mama, it's a good idea. Let's take a look and see how this works. All right. You should see a VFP window. We have 4 steps, remember: component, UI, enhancements, and merging. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a control, the HTML control, onto a form. Let's pretend that I know how to type without actually turning on my cap locks key. And let's pretend I didn't put the insert key. How's that typing going? All right, so we put the control in this form. We went to our ActiveX controls and our form controls toolbar, and we put the HTML editor onto this form. And that gives us the ability, if we run this form, to type in text. That's pretty exciting. In order to really make use of this, we're going to have to add some UI controls. And here's where the editor really shines, because if we add a control, let's say that we add a button to bold our text. So we put a button with a B on there for bold, and the code in this button is relatively simple. What we're doing is we're going to call the exec command method of our HTML editing object. This is probably the method you'll use most often. There's a property of document HTML body that has the HTML. This is what you use most often. And we're using our include file to learn what exactly numbers we're supposed to send here. But if we do that, we can type some text. How we can make it bold. Now this works not only at the insertion point, but it works on selected text as well. So I can select the word hello and bold it, or unbold it. Now, in order to make that a little more useful, we're going to have to add a bunch more controls. So here we've added a whole bunch more controls. I can center justify. I can create lists. I can change colors. I can change text. I can do just about anything, and it's all based on the same concept of the fact that under each one of these buttons is simply a parameter sent to the exec command. Those parameters I simply took out of the include file, and then I set focus back to the object. With that exec command, everything in the include file I've put onto a button here, almost everything. Now I even added a preview button, and this is not from the object, but I added a preview button where it will actually open the text in your web browser. So if we run this, now we can do all kinds of cool stuff. That's what we want to do here. Right, justify it, and let's put in a hyperlink. hyperlink to. Put a hyperlink there. Just about anything that we can do at HTML, we can do now because we have these controls in here. Now, we want to enhance that a little bit by doing a couple of things, and that is that we want to be able to show the user the actual HTML code if they wish. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put a button called Preview on here. I'm sorry, a button called H. And that allows me to see the text. So if I type hello, and then I type bold there, and I press my H button, I can see the actual HTML code. And I can toggle back and forth between that by using my H and ABC button. And it's the exact same text. All I do is when I change the HTML code, I take the information that's in my document HTML property of my HTML editing object, and I put it in the value of an edit box that I put on the screen. And since this edit box has no idea how to display WYSIWYG HTML, it just displays the HTML text, which shows you what's really inside of the object. Of course, it's HTML text, and it's being rendered by our DHTML editing object. So I can just put this in there. I added, you can see behind here, I added a little editing box. So I can switch back and forth between seeing the actual HTML and the preview and the WYSIWYG version. Now that's a pretty good enhancement. We want to do one more thing, and that is we want to do merging. Now merging means is that I can personalize these emails. Now, one of the things that people like is to receive a personalized email. And whether you're sending out one email or whether you're sending out 500 emails to potential clients, or whether you're sending out 300 emails to the softball league, it should have each person's name or whatever information you want in there. Your game is at 2 o'clock. Have a nice day. And the way we do that is we have a list of fields that we can insert. And when we press insert button, at the insert point, it issues a merge command. Now, I'm using these curly braces as the text merge delimiters because they're not used all that often in anything in HTML. And then with a simple text merge command, I can create each email as I send it personalized. I'm going to replace everything that's in the merge fields with the name of the actual field in the table. And the way we set that up, is I simply created a list box, and I put in there 2 columns. The first column has the name of what the user would see and select. The second column has the actual table field that should go in there. And at that point, we can do just about anything now. We can create HTML in any format we want. We can view the actual HTML. We can preview it in our browser, and we can personalize it with whatever fields we've decided a person should be able to personalize with. We've just given VFP the ability to edit HTML emails. And of course, this can be used in any kind of application across the board. We use it in a variety of different applications, which I'll come back to. So we had a component, the UI, the enhancements, and the merging to create the ability to actually create an HTML body that we can use to send an email. Are there questions at this point?
Yes. Does it accept RTF from Word via cut and paste and take the formatting?
That is a good question. That is a good question. I know it can open, it can import and bring in an HRTF file. I don't know if you can cut and paste and it'll keep the formatting or not.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Does it do spell check as well, or just HTML formatting?
To do HTML formatting, you'd need a different control for spell check.
Okay. Is it okay to distribute the OCX with our apps?
Yes.
Okay. How to avoid getting blacklisted by sending 300 emails to my softball team in a short time span?
um, the answer to that is throttling. Most ISPs or people that are looking for massive amounts of emails being sent out are looking for emails sent per hour. So therefore, if you throttle it, so that if I'm sending out 1,000 emails to potential clients, instead of sending them out all at once, I send out maybe 100 every hour for the next 10 hours, then I'm less likely to get in any kind of trouble. So throttling is what can help that.
Okay, that's it for questions.
Alrighty. Now we're having a little intercession before we go on, and that is some point somebody's going to ask me, or they're going to ask Doug is going to ask me, right? Why don't we use a third-party control for some of these things that we're going to be doing today? And the answer is I'm against using third-party controls that are not part of Windows unless absolutely necessary for the following reasons. Deployment. Today, people are very security conscious, and network administrators often have the workstations locked down. Installing a shortcut might be allowed. And most PCs have these controls already, and even if they don't, it's a simple thing. But install a third-party control may require, right, the permission and the approval of a network administrator. And then if we need to update it, we once had a network administrator. It took 3 weeks just for him to look at the control and approve it. And then he had to push it out to everybody. With Windows components, it's a lot easier. You don't have those kind of deployment issues. Even if a network administrator were to say to you, well, our systems are all locked down, you can register those things on the fly. And even if not, a Windows component is not something that's going to give you a difficulty in getting approved. The next reason that makes me not want to use third-party ActiveX controls is point of failure. I want to be able to debug the system with everything under my control. Now, a problem with a third-party control stops me in my tracks, assuming it's really a problem with the control and I've accurately diagnosed it. I want to be able to control, okay, well, no pun intended, the application and its workspace. For me to tell someone, a client of mine, that we are checking with our vendor is not something they want to hear. And we have had to do that in the past. And also maintenance. Uh-oh, the third-party vendor has released an update. Now I'm back to my deployment issues. Now I'm the version manager for another vendor. I know that no new versions of Windows are going to break my HTML editor. If that were to happen, even, it's under my control. I have less confidence in the future compatibility of a third-party vendor, to tell you the truth. Now, don't get me wrong. I use Chillcat and others in my applications, um, but I only do when I have no other viable options. Now, someone might say to me, "Oh, but you know what? I work with a company that has an ActiveX control, and they are great. They're just wait. They support everything super duper quickly. They come out with updates super duper quickly. They're going to be here forever." So before we even go down that road, let's make a list of all the vendors that we've dealt with in VFP in the last 20 years that have stopped supporting a product, discontinued a product, or simply gone out of business. And if you're skeptical of this, take a look sometime at the history of ActiveBar from Data Dynamics. It was a massively popular control, and something went wrong with it, and they stopped supporting it. And now there are compatibility issues and systems breaking all over. Now, would everybody agree with me about my reluctance to use ActiveX controls? Probably not. And I was mentioning this to my wife and my sounding board, and I said, people always like to use this latest, sexiest control, latest, sexiest thing. She said, if anybody would understand using tried and true technology, it would be VFP developers. If we were in person, people would be laughing at that. We have one more intercession besides ActiveX controls before we go on. So ActiveX controls is something that I had to talk about, and now I'm going to have to talk about authentication. What about modern authentication and all that jazz? We're building an email system here. SMTP servers rarely require such a login. In case you're in doubt of that, let's look at a few statistics. 27% of emails worldwide are sent via Gmail. For business emails, 34% of corporate users send their email via Gmail. And in the United States, this is unbelievable to me. 53% of emails sent in the United States for corporate business purposes are sent in Gmail, via Gmail. Less than 10% of emails are sent what we used to consider the traditional email server, where it manages a domain like coolcompany.com. And email servers that require a higher login than NTLM, I'm sure they're out there, but I've never run into one. A lot of servers are restricted by IP address and other things, but the idea that you need a high level sophisticated login in order to use an SMTP server is simply not accurate. If we were building an application that was going to do all kinds of other things, bring up your Google Calendar, whatever. Although we'll get to that pretty soon at the end when we get to Google. We might be interested in that. But all we need is the basic authentication that every SMTP server allows. All right, back on track. I had to take a little digression for ActiveX controls and a little digression for authentication. Are there any questions about either of those?
Nope, no questions.
Terrific. Now, let's send the email. There are a lot of ways of sending email in VFP. We all know a lot of them. You can manually interact with the SMTP server. We can use MAPI or Outlook calls. We can use Rick Stahl's tremendously great product, WWIP stuff. Doug has a product in VFP. It was called SF Mail, Doug. I believe that was it.
Yep.
Which is a very solid, reliable product. We can also use third-party controls. I know I just said I don't like third-party controls, but I'm trying to be honest, so I'm including them on the list. But what we're going to use, our recommendation, which may surprise some people, is CDO. CDO is part of Windows, and it can save emails in EML format. It has extensive manipulation abilities. It's streamlined. It's very robust. It stands for Collaboration Data Objects. It was originally introduced in Windows Server 2000. It was originally designed as an API for interacting with Windows email, calendar, and contacts, and allowing applications to interact with Exchange Server and Outlook. So it has it in a MAPI interface. And originally, if you've never heard of it, originally called OLE messaging. Then it was changed to active messaging. Then it was changed to active messaging. And then it was changed to something else, and then to something else. And finally, it changed to CDO, Collaboration Data Objects. Now, it sounds like I just made it sort of complicated, but it's really not that complicated. CDO really involves CDO-sys.dll. Microsoft's position is that if you need CDO and you don't have it, please feel free to purchase and install Exchange Server or certain versions of Outlook. But then it admitted that, well, you know, not including CDO with all of our products was not really a great idea. So they went back to including it. In fact, CDO is used extensively with Office 365. I admit it's not like a whole complicated thing, right? But it's really 2 DLLs you probably got installed anyway. If not, there's a URL where you can download it from. Now let's take a look at how we're going to send an email with CDO. Yes, Mr. Mailman, we will take a look at it right now. Now, we've created our email here with whatever we wanted. We've created a subject. And we need to send it. Before we send it, though, we're going to need a little bit more information. The truth is, if the workstation or the server you're running on has SMTP settings already in it, for example, from Outlook or something, you could just send a message with a few lines of code. But most likely it doesn't, so we're going to assume that it doesn't, and we're going to need some settings. In order to get those settings, we're going to press this button, which is going to open up a form, which is going to give us the settings that we need. We need the name of the SMTP server. We need the return address. All right, we're going to check whether we're using SSL, whether it uses a specific port, the authentication. We're going to fill all that in, and that gives us the information we need to send an email. And all we did to do that was in our settings button, I called this form email send, and I passed as a reference object the current form that we're looking at right now. So then in my form, I take the object that was sent and I instantiate it as an object in this form. And then each one of these objects, each one of these text boxes rather, controls a specific piece of data that will automatically flow back to our original form, because this is just simply a representation of the original form. So once we've got these settings, we no longer need this form. Now we're going to actually send the email. We've got a method here called send mail. Now the truth is that this it looks a lot more complicated than it is, and I'll tell you why. That is, I put a lot of comments in here. If you stripped out all the comments, it wouldn't look nearly as complicated. But in fact, in the white paper, I showed an example of this with comments stripped out, and it's pretty straightforward and pretty clean. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our CDO constants. We will not be using most of these. Some of them are obvious what they do: suppress objects, suppress frames, suppress images, etc. Right? So we're going to put those in there, but the truth is we won't be using most of them. Those CDO constants come, of course, from Microsoft. We're going to have three objects that we're going to need to instantiate: a message object, a configuration object, and a field object. Message object, configuration object, and field object. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to instantiate our message object, which is CDO message. Then we're going to create a configuration object with CDO configuration. And we'll see what we're going to do with all these. And finally, our configuration object has an object called fields, which we're going to put into our own thing called object fields. So we have object fields, object config, and object message. We instantiated the first two independently, and we instantiated fields as an object from our configuration object. Now, these fields object is what's about to do all the heavy lifting for us to set all the parameters. So we're going to use this fields object, and it has a method called item, and that's really that's where all the action happens. And in order to put the proper schema and proper information in there, Microsoft has all of that information for you in their schemas website. Otherwise, you would have to look up each schema and put it in as you call the item, but nobody does that. I've never seen anybody do that. These are all available on Microsoft Schemas, Microsoft.com. So we're going to tell it to start a new session. A new session so that we don't accidentally trip over our old section. Another session, sorry. We're going to put in the name of our STMP server, mail.whatever. Now, if it's a non-standard SMTP port, we're going to specify the SMTP port with our item call. If we want SSL, we're going to turn on SSL. I'm sorry. If we want to log in, we're going to put the login and the password, and whether we want basic or NTLM. Then we're going to put in whether we're using SSL, and that's the end of our fields. After we've done that, the fields object has one method that we need to call, that's update. And once it's updated, we stick it back into our configuration object. I'm sorry, I said that backwards, please forgive me. So update updates our configuration object through the fields object that we've created. And now we're going to put the whole thing back into our message object. So our configuration object spawned the fields object. The fields object used the item to set the parameters, and then it updated its parent configuration object, and we stuck it back in the message object. So now everything is in the message object. Our configuration, which came from the fields object inside of the configuration, everything is inside of our one message object now. So now we can set what we consider to be the regular email things: the from, the to, the subject. Um, there's a property called auto generate body text body. Sorry, that means that if it detects there's no HTML code in this message, what should it do with it? And this will tell it, you know what, if there's no HTML code, it's just text, don't consider that an error, just go ahead and send it like that. And we're going to have it MIME formatted, which we will see why later. And then what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily save, just for 1 second, we're going to save our document HTML data to a file, and then we're going to use our message object create HTML body to read in that file and create the message body. So then we have the message to, from, subject, a couple of properties, and we've stuck in from our DHTML editing object, we've stuck in the create HTML body, we've stuck in the document HTML by quickly saving it to a file and sticking it in our object message with create HTML body. The only thing left to do after that is to send it with the send function. Now this is not just a theoretical session here. We use this exact skeleton in a major application that we distribute worldwide. And which I will now switch to, he says. This is a major application we distribute worldwide. It's got many, many hundreds of deployments. Don't worry, all the information you're going to see in here is fake. And also the person who picked this color set to work with is clearly not a graphic artist. So I've got an email here, and I put my own email in there. When I press send, hey, this looks sort of familiar. I put in the subject. I do all the formatting that we just said. If I want, I can even add attachments. And if I add the attachments, I just tell my message object which files to attach, and it will attach them. Now, I've got the settings for SMTP server stored in the user's configuration. However, I do give them the option to override it if they wish. So I'm going to send that message, and done. Then I also use my merging to be able to send mass emails. Let's send a broadcast email to everybody here. And we're going to just dance while it does its selecting records, which goes very quickly unless you happen to be sitting here in a session watching it. But if you find all the records that met my parameters, it's going to give me a list of them. And then it's just going to loop through and send my email to each one of those. And using my merge fields, it'll come out, dear Doug, dear Tuvia, your ball game is at 3 o'clock, etc. So this exact skeleton is what we use here. And of course, it comes out just like a regular email. I mean, there's nothing special about regular headers, everything that you would expect. And we'll see what it looks like in just a moment in text. But are there any questions at this point?
Yeah, Tom asks that he's read that CDO is no longer supported by Gmail. Is that true? And if so, can I overcome it without user interaction?
Yeah, it is not true. Well, it's true, but it's not true. And yes, you can overcome it. And I'm going to cover that in a few slides. Google recently pulled a fast one on us, and I'm going to come back to that. That's an excellent question, Tom. If you don't mind, I'll come back to it in a few slides.
Okay. Why do you save the HTML to a file?
Because it's easier. Because that way, when the object message reads it in, it's easier than having it read in directly from my document HTML property.
Okay, that's it for questions.
It's just a matter of ease and convenience. Right now, we just created an email. Cool, we sent it. Cool, but we need to store it. Otherwise, the whole point of this is going to be gone, because I just said that we can store it and retrieve it and everything. We got to store it somehow. So the code to store it is pretty simple. Right? I create an ADOBDB stream object, and I use my object message data source method to save it, and I save it to whatever path I've decided. Now you could put the email into the table in a memo or something, or you could save it externally on storage. For this example, we're saving it externally on storage, and then I'm storing in the email table the reference to it. So I'm storing the name of the path and the name of the file. I could just as easily put the actual email in there. And now I have the actual email on a file or in a table that was sent. I have to then be able to retrieve it. Now, EML is a text-based standard. So therefore, we could use a commercial parser, or we could parse the text files ourselves, or we could just do it with our friendly CDO. Let's take one more trip back to CDO land. And this program is included with the code example as well. Oops. So basically, I'm getting the reference from the table. Oh, we're going to use that example in a moment. Got ahead of myself. I'm getting the reference to where the file is from my table. I'm creating my message object, my CDO message object. I'm creating a stream, and I'm reading it in my message object. And then I'm going to run my form, and I'm going to populate all of my fields. Let's actually do that. And it pulls it back out and puts everything back in there. All the headers, everything you could possibly want. Now, the one thing it does not put in the original merge code. You're seeing the merged information. It's going to say dear Tuvia, dear Doug on it. Now we can even I'm sorry, my mouse got a little bit ahead of me there. My apologies. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, back to our Visual Fox Pro. Now we can even recreate attachments that were sent where the file does not even exist anymore. And this error message is what I'm about to show you. And that is, here's what an EML file looks like. An EML file is a pretty straightforward text file. Has the headers you would expect in an email. And here's my the actual message that was sent. Attached, please find your invoice. Now, it would be done at that point, except, whoa, we sent an attachment. Look at this great big old mime thing here. Ugh. How are we going to parse that? Oh, we're going to use our CDO message object to do it. And we can recreate the files that were sent as attachments, whether they exist now or not. Let's see how we do that. That's really cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the fact that we're getting this out of the table. So I'm going to allow us to select our own EML file. And I'm going to select one that I happen to know has attachments in it. Not only did it restore this, oh, I did this before, I'm sorry. My mistake. Um, Not what I wanted to do. I recreated the file about a few minutes ago when I was testing this out, so I'm just going to get rid of them now. No pressure here. There it is. Right now, there are no PDF files in this folder, and there's nothing up my sleeve. Now I'm going to run my PRG. I'm going to select my EML file. We're doing that just because I happen to know that one has an attachment. Normally, we would take it out of the table. And recreates our original PDF file. However many attachments we had, 10 attachments, 1 attachment, 100 attachments. Now, what we do with this in our application that I was mentioning earlier is we have a little tab here. This is every email that the person's ever received. And I can recreate whatever attachments were sent, an invoice, whatever it was. I can recreate the exact email with the exact attachment that was sent. So I can see everything I've ever sent to this ATI person. I can also report on this. We report on how many emails were sent, who sent them, where they were sent to, and things like that. Well, this is managing the email system. Any questions at this point?
Yeah. Can I store the sent emails in my Outlook or Gmail sent items folders?
Not with CD. Not easily with CDO. If you wanted to do that, you would make a call to Outlook. It would automatically do that. The problem with that is then it's very hard to manage because then you have to read in and read out all of the Outlook files. Which not that easy.
How do you handle attachments that are themselves EML files with attachments?
Attachments that are EML files themselves with attachments. So I haven't tried that, but I believe what would happen is it would decode the EML file and it would create for you then the second EML file with the attachments in it, and you would have to decode that one. And then if that would result in another, you have to decode that. I think that's how you have to sub emails. I'm not sure what circumstances you would use that. So if you want to give me an example, I might be able to give you a better answer.
Okay, that's it for now.
Okay. We threw out a lot of stuff here. Let's take a breath and see what we did and will be doing here. First thing is the user edits HTML text with the HTML edit and associated bells and whistles that we create. Then the user enters their email SMTP specific information. Got a 1 there. We send the email via CDO. We use CDO to create an EML file. We log the email and associated info to tables. And upon demand, we read back the EML file via CDO and display once again. Now, in theory, they could re-edit that email. Not advisable, because once an email is sent, it should be locked down. But that's the simple process. Now, by the way, just as a note, there may be updates to my white paper. The current version is 0.91, and assuming tomorrow does not, do something horrible to me, so I'll probably keep putting my updates up. The concept of tracking and managing emails in VFP, this is a compelling tool for application development. The skeleton that you see in the white paper, that what I've gone over here today, is designed to be expanded in any way you can imagine. Reporting, editing, automating attachments. We send out thousands of emails with automated attachments for invoices. The whole thing is automated. It's personalized, each email. They get their own attachment, and it's all automated. And that way the user doesn't have to do so much. Right? And this is just the first starting point. You can do a lot of things with it. Basically, you've got VFP mail. Let's see, any questions at this point?
No, it looks like that's it for questions.
Okay. Well, as we were mentioning like before earlier, the questions and the timing. So we'd like to thank you for attending the session. Fill out the evaluations, please. Enjoy your conference, and thank you very much. I believe there's a room we can go to at this point after the session that will allow us to discuss anything further.